The wind was dry that evening, full of dust and the scent of something fading. Cade Harlan rode slow along the ridge, the sun a bleeding wound against the horizon. His horse's hooves crunched against brittle earth, each step measured, steady, like the ticking of a clock running out of time. He'd ridden 100 miles for less pleasant work, but this one itched at him, like a burr under the saddle. The letter in his pocket, creased, stamped, and sealed by the bank, felt heavier than it should. It wasn't the paper that weighed him down. It was the thought of what it meant. He pulled it out again, even though he'd read it a dozen times. Samuel Grant, delinquent on payment, property subject to reclamation. The words were clean, cold, and final. Cade stuffed it back into his coat. Words like that didn't care about men. They only cared about money. The Grant place came into view as he rode down the last slope of the valley. A lonely spread of land, half buried in dust, framed by the silhouettes of two leaning cottonwoods that looked as tired as the man who owned them. The fences were sagging, the barn roof patched with mismatched boards, and smoke from the chimney drifted thin and weak into the gray sky. Once, Cade had heard, this had been one of the best farms in the county. Good wheat, fat cattle, plenty of laughter. That was before the drought, before fever took the farmer's wife, before everything good seemed to wither. Cade drew rein at the gate. It hung crooked on rusted hinges. He sat there a moment, the reins loose in his hand, staring at the cabin. He could hear the faint clatter of dishes inside, the slow rhythm of someone moving carefully, as though afraid the world might break under their touch. He dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a thud, and tied his horse to the fence. The dust rose and drifted away, and with it, what little warmth remained in the light. Cade straightened his hat and walked toward the porch. The boards creaked beneath his weight. When he knocked, the sound echoed through the stillness like a warning. The door opened just a sliver at first. Then a young woman stepped into view. She couldn't have been more than 20, maybe a year or two younger. Her hair was the color of late autumn wheat, her dress simple, patched, and clean. Her eyes, though, they were the kind that made a man forget the rest. Sharp blue and full of something between fear and fire. "You're from the bank," she said. It wasn't a question. Cade took off his hat. "Name's Harlan. I was sent to collect what's owed." Her gaze didn't soften. "You mean to take the land?" He hesitated. "That's what the papers say." She didn't move from the doorway. "My father's sick," she said quietly. "He can't stand, can barely breathe." "There's nothing left here worth taking." Cade's eyes flicked past her shoulder. Inside, the small cabin was dim but neat. A few chairs, a stove, a cot by the fire. On that cot lay a man he recognized from town years ago, Samuel Grant. His face was thin, the bones sharp beneath sunken skin, eyes hollowed from pain and exhaustion. The rasp of his breathing filled the space between them. The girl turned slightly, as though to shield her father from the intruder. "You've got no mercy, do you? Just another man come to take what's not his." Cade felt a pang of something like shame, though he wasn't sure why. He'd been called worse things before. He'd earned most of it. "I'm sorry, miss," he said, "but I've got orders." "It's not personal." Her lip trembled, but she held her chin high. "That's what they all say. Not personal. That's just what men say when they want to do something cruel and still sleep at night." Cade didn't reply. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound like a lie. He shifted his weight, the boards creaking again. "I'll give you until morning. By sunrise I have to take the deed." She blinked, like she couldn't quite believe it. "You'd throw a dying man out of his home?" "I don't like it," Cade said, "but I can't change it." "Then maybe you shouldn't be doing it." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He'd been insulted before, spit on, even shot at. But this was different. There was no hatred in her tone, just quiet disappointment, and somehow that stung worse. She started to close the door, but her father's voice stopped her. "Lila," he rasped, barely audible. "Let him in. No sense fighting what's already done." The girl hesitated, then opened the door a little wider. Cade stepped inside, the air warm from the fire and thick with the scent of medicine and old wood. Samuel Grant looked up at him with a ghost of a smile. "Didn't expect to see you again, Harlan." Cade nodded slightly. "Didn't expect to come under these terms." The old man coughed, his shoulders shaking. "Ain't your fault." "I knew this day had come." Lila moved to his side, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. "You shouldn't talk," she whispered. "Save your strength." Cade stood awkwardly near the table, the letter still burning a hole in his coat pocket. He watched her care for her father, her movements tender but efficient, like she'd been doing it far too long. She didn't look at Cade again. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight," he said finally. "We'll talk in the morning." Lila didn't answer. She didn't even nod. She just kept her eyes on her father, her lips pressed into a thin line. Outside, the cold had settled deep. Cade crossed the yard and ducked into the barn. It smelled of hay, old leather, and emptiness. He found a place in the loft, spread his blanket, and lay back staring at the gaps in the roof where stars poked through. He could hear the wind brushing the walls, the faint creak of the farmhouse door in the distance. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing there, small, proud, and terrified, all at once. He'd seen desperation before, but not like that. Hers wasn't the kind that begged. It was the kind that dared the world to take one more thing and see what happened. He turned on his side, muttering a curse. What was he doing? He'd taken land from better men than Samuel Grant. He'd never lost sleep over it before. But that girl, Lila, had looked at him like he was something worse than the law, worse than death itself. He tried to tell himself it didn't matter. Come sunrise, it would be over. The bank would have its land and he'd ride on to the next job. Still, as he listened to the faint sound of her voice drifting from the house, soft, low, comforting her father, Cade felt something in him stir that he hadn't felt in years. Regret. When the first light of morning spilled across the valley, pale gold over the frost, Cade was already saddling his horse. He told himself it was just another job. But when he looked toward the cabin and saw her standing on the porch wrapped in her father's old coat, her hair shining like fire in the cold dawn, he knew that whatever happened next, nothing about this job was going to feel simple again. The sun broke over the far ridge slow and pale, painting the valley in streaks of gold and pink. Cade Harlan stood by his horse, tightening the cinch with fingers that felt heavier than iron. He'd been awake most of the night, listening to the wind scrape against the barn walls, listening to that voice inside him, the one he usually ignored, telling him this was wrong. But morning didn't wait for conscience, and neither did the law. He turned toward the house. The chimney was smoking again, a thin, uncertain wisp rising into the cold air. A dog barked somewhere off in the distance, then went quiet. Cade adjusted his hat, squared his shoulders, and started across the yard. His boots crunched against the frost-bitten grass, each step slow, deliberate, final. The cabin door opened before he could knock. Lila Grant stood there, framed by the dim light from within. Her face was pale, lips pressed together hard enough to stop them from trembling. She wore the same patched dress as the night before, the sleeves too thin for the morning chill, and her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. She didn't greet him, didn't even look angry, just tired, like someone who'd spent too long fighting a losing battle. "Morning, Miss Grant," Cade said quietly. She nodded once. "He's still asleep. The fever got worse overnight." He hesitated. The smell of wood smoke and medicine drifted out the door. "I'm sorry to hear that." "You're not here to be sorry," she said. "You're here to finish what you started." Cade flinched at that, though he tried not to show it. "The law's clear," he said. "I've got to take possession, but I'll make it easy. You and your father can stay till tomorrow night. I'll tell the sheriff you left without trouble." Her eyes lifted then, sharp and blue like shards of glass. "Tomorrow night?" she said bitterly. "You think one more day will change anything? You take this house, you take his life with it." "Lila." He stopped. The sound of her name on his tongue startled them both. She turned fully toward him now, the wind catching strands of her hair. "You could walk away," she said. "You could leave us be." "I could," Cade admitted. "But the bank'll just send another man, and he won't give you till morning." The silence stretched. A bird called faintly from somewhere near the trees. Lila stepped closer, her boots brushing frost. Her voice was softer now, trembling. "Then take something else." Cade frowned. "What are you talking about?" She swallowed hard. Her hands twisted in front of her, then stilled. "Take me instead." He blinked, certain he'd misheard. "What?" She met his gaze, eyes wide and shining. You said the debt has to be paid, so take me. I'll work for you, serve you, whatever you want. Just don't take this land. Not while he's still breathing. Cade's throat went dry. The words hit him like a punch. He took a step back, shaking his head. You don't know what you're saying. I do, she said, and her voice broke. You think I haven't seen what happens when men like you come to take what's owed? I've watched neighbors lose everything, seen wives beg on their knees while their husbands drank themselves into the ground. I won't let that happen here. Not to him. If this lands the price, then I'll pay it myself. Cade felt something twist deep inside him, something old and buried. He'd seen desperation before, but not like this. Not clean, not brave. It was the kind that made him wish he'd never learned to ride, never learned to hold a gun or sign a contract. Lila. He started again, but she cut him off. Please, she whispered. He's all I've got. You could drag us out into the dirt right now and the world wouldn't blink. But if you have any mercy left, any at all, let him die under his own roof. Her words broke something in him. He turned away, staring out at the valley, at the dry field stretching to the horizon. The wind had picked up, carrying a low whistle through the fence posts. I ain't the kind of man you think I am, he said finally. Then prove it. He turned back. She was standing straight now, her chin lifted, tears glinting but unshed. Take the land if you must, she said. But let me come with you. I'll pay the debt myself. The morning light hit her face, and Cade saw then just how young she was. Too young to talk like that, too young to carry a life of grief on her shoulders. He felt the weight of the paper in his pocket. The deed, the signature, the seal, and suddenly it felt like poison. He reached into his coat, pulled out the document, and stared at it. The words looked smaller now, meaningless. Black ink pretending to have power over flesh and blood. Lila's breath hitched when she saw it. You're really going to take it? Cade looked up at her. For a moment, their eyes locked, and something passed between them. Something wordless and heavy as the dawn. Then, without another word, he tore the paper in half. The sound was sharp in the cold air, a single final crack that seemed to echo through the valley. Lila gasped. What are you doing? Making a choice, he said simply. He tore the pieces again, let them fall to the ground, the wind scattering them like ashes. You tell your father he still owns his land. But you two can't stay forever. This place will kill you if the debt don't. When spring comes, head east. Find a new start. She stared at him, speechless. Her lips parted, her eyes wide with disbelief. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for us? Cade's voice came low, rough. Because I remember my own father losing everything to men who thought paper meant power. Because I'm tired of doing their kind of work. She took a hesitant step forward. You'll be ruined for this, she said. He shrugged. I've been ruined before. The corners of her mouth trembled, but she smiled anyway, a faint, fragile smile that made the cold morning feel a little warmer. Behind her, from inside the cabin, came the weak sound of her father calling her name. She turned to go, but stopped halfway to look back at him. You don't have to go yet, she said softly. You could stay a while. Have breakfast, maybe? Cade shook his head. If I stay, I won't leave at all. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped at her face. Cade mounted his horse, pulling the reins taut. He looked down at her one last time. Take care of him, he said. I will, she whispered. And thank you. He gave her a nod, then turned his horse toward the ridge. The hooves struck the frozen ground, the sound fading into the distance. Lila stood there long after he was gone, watching the dust rise and settle again. The wind had turned softer now, and as she bent to pick up the torn pieces of paper, one scrap caught against her palm. It bore only 2 words, the bank seal and the name Samuel Grant. She looked at it for a long moment, then let it go. The wind caught it, carried it away, and she whispered almost to herself, You still have a soul, Mr. Harlan. Far off on the ridge, Cade slowed his horse and turned once more to look back. The cabin was small against the endless sky, smoke curling up into the morning. He felt the ache in his chest ease just a little. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd done something right.